Welcome to Quick Photography Workshops with me, Lucy Cooper. These are very quick workshops covering some photography fundamentals. Most of the images I use are my own, and what I will share with you about some of the techniques we cover are from my own experience and practice. There are no end resources online to pad out your knowledge and understanding, and I'll share some of those with you at the end of this workshop. Today is composition 2, and in this short video we'll talk about some basic compositional techniques that can help take your images from zero to hero. These are negative space, pairs, shapes and repeating patterns. There is another video on some composition basics like rule of thirds, fill the frame and leading lines. And if you haven't watched my video about light and focus, then I recommend you watch that alongside this video and composition 1. Together they should start to build your foundational knowledge of photography. I've tried to use as many of my own images in this presentation as I can. Some are from online resources, but most are my own. I'll let you know if they're not my own. All right, well, first of all, a bit about me before we leap in. My name is Lucy Cooper. I'm not in this image. Actually, I am in this image. I'm just above the word who and below the word first in the plaid jacket. I'm so used to not being in images, I didn't even recognise myself. I'm a researcher and resource management planner who would really rather be a full-time photographer. I'm entirely self-taught and see every opportunity to photograph as an opportunity to practice. Before we leap into some of these compositional techniques, I think it's really important to say that photography is highly subjective, and in photography competitions, as in real life, judges can and will have wildly different views on the merits of an image. So yeah, it's very much Marmite to some degree, photography. And there will certainly be some times that your taste is challenged by some of the images that you come across. So let's crack on into some of these compositional techniques, and let's talk about negative space. This is the Solace in the Wind sculpture on Wellington waterfront, and probably a lot of you are very familiar with this image or with this sculpture. In the first video on composition, we talked about filling the frame, and filling the frame is really good. It can be really effective, but sometimes you can take a step back and use empty space instead as part of the composition. Give the subject room to breathe. I find it can be really useful to use this technique if you have a great subject but a really busy background. So you could either choose to walk right up to the subject and let it fill the frame, or you can step right back and you can use your position in relation to the subject to get rid of the background noise and focus on the subject by creating negative space. And then it can be a really effective technique. So if you're familiar with sculpture in the wind or Solace in the Wind sculpture, then you'll know that if you're looking at him at kind of eye level, at a human scale, then you've got the whole of Wellington Harbour behind him, or you've got the sea. You've always got something in the frame. So I really wanted to capture him. He's such an extraordinary character, and he's got such an extraordinary expression on his face. I decided to, in order to cut out the background noise and focus on him, I walked right up to him. I stood slightly below his head and I pointed the camera kind of towards his face and into the sky. So I've got heaps of negative space on the right hand side of the frame, and his face dominates the left hand third. And if you've watched my other video on compositional techniques and rule of thirds, you'll see that this image does obey the rule of thirds to a degree. Let's have another look at an image that explores negative space. This is the little church that's out in Farnborough. Some of you may be familiar with this church. I poked my camera through the fence to get rid of the distraction of the fence. And then I used my distance and the fact that I didn't have a zoom lens and the incredibly clear sky to my advantage. The negative space here, to my mind, accentuates the daintiness of the church and the bigness of the sky, and makes it feel very rural and very remote. But, you know, I had to do some manipulation of my body and my camera in order to capture that. And it was a deliberate choice to kind of use all that space above the church to accentuate the smallness of the church in that scene. Moving on then to pairs. Many photos have a single main subject, but what happens if you have two instead? Looking for pairs can be a lot of fun, and it can make for some really interesting images. This is my kids' legs, so we've got quite a few kind of pairs and reflection going on here. We've got their pair of feet, and then we've got the pairness of the reflection as well of their feet in the wet sand. Here's another example, this time double pairs and filling the frame. So I've kind of used two techniques here, and you can find out more about fill the frame in my other video on composition techniques. This was taken at the Featherstone Saturday Market, and if you haven't been yet, I strongly urge you to go. It's an incredible market. So really here I was really taken by the palimpsest of on the labels, you know, the fact that they've been written on countless times and they've got this lovely grubby quality to them. I was really taken by the orderliness of the fruit arranged, red on the left, green on the right. I love the fact that I love to be able to fill the frame with these kind of repeating patterns and shapes, and I love the pear, the element of the pears that went with it as well. Not the pears in the fruit, pears as in the thing. Anyway, so that's another example of pairs. And here's another. This is the seats that you can find in the square in Martinborough. And again, you've kind of got the pairs of the bench and the pillars on the wall behind, and also the shadow creating a really nice kind of sense of remoteness here. So pairs is a really awesome thing to use. You can use it windows, doors. Get your students to look around and look for pairs. If they're really struggling for inspiration, it can be something, a bit of a circuit breaker, to give them a specific task to go and find pairs, and then to use some of their other compositional techniques to create a really arresting image. Let's now look at shapes. So look for a subject with strong shapes like squares, rectangles, triangles, circles. Man-made objects like buildings I find work really well for this. So architecture, you find a lot of these strong shapes. And we can also, in the next image, see how you can use strong sunlight to your advantage as well when it comes to looking at highly structured shapes that you often find in the man-made environment. This image, by the way, is a wall in Christchurch, which I visited earlier this year. And you can see the kind of rectangles and the squares all over the shop in this image, and a little bit of rules of thirds, I guess, with the break in the wall and the window compartments taking up more or less the top third of the frame. This is an example of some really interesting shapes. These are the lovely panels and fencing that go around the Margaret Mahy family playground in Christchurch. It was a wonderful, bright sunny day. It was quite early in the morning, and I really enjoyed the way that the strong sunlight created these incredible shadows and on these rectangles of bright colour and black shadow, and then you've got the diagonal line which kind of links all those shadows up together. And the rectangle is a really strong motif. You can see they're not perfect rectangles, but still the repetitiveness of this pattern and the shape, the dominance of the shape, is something that really caught my eye. We cover light in the first video that I've prepared for you, and so you can find out a little bit more about how you can use light. But I think this is a really good example of how strong sunlight can work really well on subjects with very strong shape and definition. Here's another example of some shapes again in Christchurch. There's this wonderful kind of wooden skeleton of a cathedral shape that goes down just near the actual cathedral spot in Christchurch, and here we've kind of got triangles. They're kind of curvy triangles. I've tried to use some negative space in this image as well, and I just really appreciated how these shapes made such a beautiful contrast against the sky. It was actually quite a tricky structure to photograph because it was quite a busy background all around it, and not all parts of that background are that attractive. You know, they're quite busy. There's a lot of building work still going on in Christchurch. So this is another example of how you can use negative space and use your point of view to create a less distracting image, and one that focuses on your subject. So in this case, I pointed the camera up so that I had this beautiful sky against the background of the as a background against the cathedral structure. Now on to my final technique in this video, and this is repeating patterns. The image here is taken from the Green Jersey cycle depot in Martinborough, and it's the cycle helmets in their little racks, and I just love the way that the helmets created these repeating patterns and the wonderful vibrant colour. I also tried this image in black and white, and I think I preferred it in colour. So let's have a little bit more of a look at repeating patterns. This again is taken at Green Jersey Cycles in Martinborough, and I just love the way that the seats of the bicycles and the frames of the bicycles kept repeating over and over and over again in the workshop. So you kind of get the idea that getting your students to find these repeating patterns can make some really interesting images. And it can work in terms of filling the frame with that image, which we've explored in an earlier video, or you can use a little bit of a repeating pattern and then fill the rest with negative space. You can do all sorts of things, and really it's getting your students to move in and out of in respect of their subject, and really to explore what that subject looks like from all sorts of angles, because generally speaking, the first place that you stand and look at something might not always be the best place that you can take a photograph from. So get your students to move around as much as they can. And here's a slightly different take on the repeating patterns technique. This was a friend's dad's workshop, and I just loved the way he was so super tidy and everything was neatly arranged, and all these beautiful repeating patterns of these delicious carpenter tools and other woodworking and tools. I just loved the way that they were all kind of so neatly on display, and so that was really the focus of my image here. There's also another one in my collection where I go close up and look at the spanners, but I prefer this where you kind of get the general feel of the entire workshop taken from this one image. So that's been a few techniques there for you today. I hope you've really enjoyed exploring some of those, and I hope probably more importantly that your students will enjoy exploring some of those techniques when they're out and about with their photography with you. Here's some online resources, but there are so many resources out there. Any Google search of photography terms will bring up no end of resources, the majority of them free. And if they're not free, just type the search engine, type the search term in again and find something that is free. So thank you very much. I've really enjoyed bringing this second video on composition techniques to you. I'd love to get your feedback if you have any. I'd also like to hear from you if you have any other techniques that you'd like to explore, or some questions come up from your students or from amongst yourselves around some of these techniques. Again, all these techniques are there to learn and then to break them in order to find your creative vibe. So get your students to practice and have as much fun as they possibly can. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a lot of fun out there taking and making images.